I don't know if you've ever seen this. Now it's not my fault. If you've ever seen this cartoon that has just one frame, and it's got a bunch of superheroes in it, and sitting in the middle of this whole group of superheroes is Jesus. And he says, "Do you want to hear how I saved the world?" It's a little different. Well, that's what we're talking about. This worship series that I started last week was inspired by this book called Marvelous Myths. It's by Dr. Russell Dalton. And he was actually one of my professors in seminary. He was my Christian education professor. And I enjoyed his classes very much. And so what he does in the book and what we're doing together throughout these weeks is looking at some of our favorite Marvel superheroes and seeing if we can find connections with how we live lives of faith, what lessons they have for us. So, being 4th of July weekend, I had to choose Captain America and the Falcon. And you may be like, and who? I'll explain. They actually go together. So, Captain America, in case you are not a comic book fan and like a way back comic book fan, first came out in 1941. Obviously, what's going on in the world in 1941? Just about World War II. They didn't yet quite call it that, but that was what was happening. And so the first issue had a big picture of Captain America with a big right hook to Hitler's chin. And that would be kind of the theme for the first several years of the Captain America comic book. He would be fighting the bad guys who would be Nazis, or ended up his nemesis character, Red Skull, which kind of was a stand-in for the Saint. And so, at first, they were very, very patriotic and go America, and we can do this. And obviously, it sold terrifically. It was a wonderful comic book, and it had a great run. But in the years after the war, it started to decline in popularity. There's other superheroes coming out in the 50s and stuff. And so they canceled that series and put Captain America on a shelf for a while. And they tried to reboot a couple of times, but didn't take until in the 60s, 1964, is when they did a big relaunch of Captain America. And of course, they have to explain how he reappears, right? And that's how comic superhero universes work. And so what they did was say that the Avengers, who are now a thing, stumble upon, just happen to be passing by, and see this guy floating in the water, and it turns out he has been frozen in a block of ice for all these years, and he thaws out, and they rescue him, and it turns out that he's fine. It put him in like a state of suspended animation. So he still thinks it's the 1940s. He still thinks the war's going on. And he doesn't recognize anything because everything has changed. And so this series of adventures, has him realizing that, there are new things to learn. And he goes through like, maybe if I'm not even needed anymore, and to realize that they still need the same values that he stood for then, he does again. Well, I forgot one thing. So about the origin of his powers. It's an interesting story where Steve Rogers is a scrawny little guy, young man, who wants to sign up for military service. He goes to do that, and he gets rejected because he's not fit enough. He's too little and scrawny. And then some people observe that he has some pretty great qualities. He's pretty brave, and he finds out about this top secret super soldier project. And so he signs up for that. And scientists inject him with the super soldier serum, and he instantly becomes, a foot taller and big, giant, strong guy, and it's like the perfect soldier. And the plan had been for them to make a whole battalion of these super soldiers. Right after Steve Rogers emerges in this new form, a Nazi spy is there in the room with them and shoots and kills the scientist who knows the formula. The only one, because apparently nobody ever writes anything down. And so he turns out to be the only one, and they give him a suit and call him Captain America and the big shield, and off he goes. His superpowers are they're a lot less dramatic than many of the other Marvel heroes. No spidey sense, no stickiness, climbing walls. He has kind of super strength, but it's not entirely inhuman. It's just like, slightly superhuman. I don't know if that makes sense. But he has some enhanced abilities, but he doesn't have anything that normal humans don't have. None of the X-ray vision or laser beams or stuff like that. It turns out really his superpower is his character, is that he is courageous and he lives by integrity and he leads, people want to follow, and he is a really good leader. So the comic books take an interesting turn. In the late 60s, early 70s, don't know if you remember or have read in a history book, that those were some pretty drastic times. There was a lot of change going on. A lot of unrest and uncertainty and social change was happening. And the Marvel comics reflected what was going on in the world, which I think is kind of cool, because then we can follow along with and have some dialogue around that. And although, Captain America has this great long career that, it's been a little off and on, the comics have, but they've continued up until 2007. I just can't move, apparently. The comic books start to reflect what's going on in the world and some of that unease and tension. Give us a good opportunity to look at things. Did you know that there were several instances, I counted at least 3, in which Captain America turned in his shield, put down the suit, and walked away? 3 times. Once, interestingly enough, 1974, just after Watergate. And the comic has a plot line that could loosely be similar and remind the readers of the scandal. And Captain America leaves that event, although having got things are still, he's very disheartened. And he leaves wondering if even the president could be corrupt, what do I stand for? And it causes him to really struggle with that and turn in the outfit. For a while, he then fights as nomad, a man without a country. And eventually he comes back and realizes that he has a new, bigger perspective, and he won't be quite so naive this time. There were several other points at which Captain America's interests and being became incompatible with the US government's policies and people. Now, the Falcon part. This is where he comes in. So the Falcon debuts in 1969. And at first, so he is Sam Wilson, is the regular guy's name, and he's an African American, and he lives in Harlem, and he has this trained falcon that he's used to stop crime and do good things. By the end of the comic book, he becomes the Falcon, and he has a flying. In his flying suit, he becomes partners with Captain America, and they go save the day. They even change the name of the comic series. The comic book becomes Captain America and the Falcon for 7.5 years. One of the things that changes and gets more complicated in this relationship between Captain America and his country really comes to the front in an incident with the Falcon. They race riot, which again was happening at that time, and they go in and infiltrate and find out it was a white supremacist in disguise as his nemesis, Red Skull, comes back, and they solve the situation and everything's fine. As they're walking away from that, Steve, Captain America, says to Sam, Falcon, well, I think we're going to need to keep an eye on the African Americans in that community. And Sam says, I don't like the way you said that. And they end up having an argument, a disagreement about race relations and stuff. So they show that they do end up reconciling, becoming friends again, but the Falcon ultimately goes off on his own, and he decides to concentrate on keeping Harlem safe. In one of those episodes, Stan Lee, when he started writing, he said one of his best lines that he ever wrote. He said in the February 1970 issue, Captain America is walking away from some rebels, and he says, I've spent a lifetime defending the flag and the law. Perhaps I should have battled less and questioned more. Stan Lee thinks that that's one of the best lines that he ever wrote. And I think it brings to the fore for us the balance between our allegiance to God and our allegiance to our country. People of faith have had to deal with this and sort this out forever. In fact, the people in Jesus' day, who of course not yet Christian, they had to deal with this as well. The Jewish people in the first century in Jerusalem and surrounding areas were living in occupied territory. Their land had been conquered by the Roman Empire. And so they had to pay tribute taxes and such. They had to live under this other group's rules. And so some Jews argued that paying the tribute tax would be like endorsing that oppression. Others argued that that was unnecessarily disloyal and they didn't need to do that, and especially you could get in really big trouble. And so, this being an ongoing issue, some of the people who were not fans of Jesus' work, the Pharisees and some other groups, tried to trick Jesus into taking sides, because he hasn't come down on either one. And they know if they can get him to say whichever one, they don't even care, they can turn at least part of the people against him. They can trip him up. And so, this is how it's told in Matthew 22. Then the Pharisees met together to find a way to trap Jesus in his words. They sent their disciples, along with the supporters of Herod, to him. "Teacher," they said, "we know that you are genuine, and that you teach God's way as it really is. We know that you are not swayed by people's opinions because you don't show favoritism." That sounds like a lot of buttering up, doesn't it? "So tell us what you think. Does the law," and by law in this context, they mean the Jewish law, or what we now refer to as the first 5 books of the Bible, "does the law allow people to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Knowing their evil motives, Jesus replied, "Why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used to pay the tax." And they brought him a denarian. "Whose image and inscription is this?" he asked. "Caesar's," they replied. "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." When they heard this, they were astonished, and they departed. Let us hear what the Spirit is speaking to God's people. To really understand the magnitude of what Jesus was saying, we have to have some information, some context. And that is part of what I already explained, the Roman occupation, and why he asks specifically for this coin. This is not a coin that necessarily everybody had. It's often equated with about a day's wages. So it's, a decent amount of money to be extra. So obviously, if you've got several of those extra in your pocket, you are, pretty well off by their standards. And this coin is different than the one that they used among each other and at the temple. They used their own coins, Hebrew coins, among themselves. And so he asks not for just any coin, he specifically asks for this one. And it is the one that is used to pay the tax. And he points to it. On one side of the denarian, it has an image of Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor of that day. And on the other side of the coin, it has a figure of a woman in this way that is usually interpreted as pax or peace. And then it has an inscription around the edges that says, Son of the Most High or Divine Ruler Caesar Augustus. Don't know if you recall right off the top of your head which are the first couple of commandments, but of the 10 commandments, the big ones, we've got, you shall have no other gods, and you shall make no graven images or idols. And what he is pointing out is that the person in the temple with him, nonetheless, is carrying a graven image, something that he shouldn't be carrying. And it says on the back of it, Son of God. That's pretty radical. And Jesus is calling him out and saying, let's see where you stand. Who do you worship? And then he gives that line that's very, very well known. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. So if this coin has Caesar's image and name on it, I suppose it's reasonable to assume it belongs to Caesar. What belongs to God? If you were a Jewish person who grew up, going to temple and hearing this word, you would understand that what belongs to God is literally everything. God is the creator of the world. God made and lays claim to everything. We belong to God. So Jesus isn't giving an easy yes or no answer here. He's saying, do what you have to do. Being born into this system, we have to live in the world as it is, but remember that doesn't have the final say on who you are, on who we are. That we may have to, live in the world, and Paul will later say, but not be of the world. This does not give us a nice, clear answer or a test to apply in all situations, but it gives us two really good questions. What belongs to the country, and what belongs to God? It seems to me Jesus is saying, you got to navigate this one. And it's kind of a minefield. Sometimes there will be conflicting interests between government and our call as Christians. sometimes they will align. We who claim Christ as King have to navigate between those. How do we live in this world? How do we give credit where it is due? This is a great country. This is a wonderful country. We have freedoms that many other people do not have. And we should be grateful for those who made it possible. But we should also remember that our loyalty is to Christ first, then country.